Hey everybody, thank you for coming and joining our open space town hall. Just gonna give maybe another minute to have people join, and then we will get started. Yeah. Okay. I think, yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Some more people might join in a bit, but that's okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining this open space town hall today. Also, a big thank you to Elliot Clay, who's helping with the tech, and Ellie Burnham, who's going to be taking notes for IEC today. My name is Ben Ross. Some of you may have been expecting our wonderful conservation director, Lindsay Keeney, to be running this town hall, but she's out. So I'm going to be facilitating the event today. This area is not necessarily my forte, so I hope you'll bear with me as we go through this. And with that, I'm going to share my presentation, very short presentation before we get to the panelists. Okay. Does that look good? Okay, awesome. Okay, so welcome to the Open Space Town Hall. Again, my name is Ben Ross, and I'm a research intern here at the Illinois Environmental Council. I'm just going to briefly go through the schedule for today, introduce our, including our speakers, give a brief rundown on some open space issues, and talk to you about how you can submit your public comments and or questions. So a brief rundown of the schedule. First, I'm going to talk about IEC's work on open space. After that, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers. We're extremely lucky to have a wide variety of excellent panelists today, including Daniel Hebriard, Jerry Adelman, Susan Donovan, Emmy Brawley, Olivia Dorothy, and Bob Fisher and Donnie Dan, and you can see the organizations that they are with in the PowerPoint. After our panelists have spoken, we'll have some time set aside for public comments. I'll go into greater detail regarding how you can bring up your comments here in a minute. Likely, this will last about an hour. That's how long the town halls have typically gone, but we'll go until everyone's comments have been heard. Some of our panelists may have to leave a little early, but if you have any questions for them specifically that they're not able to answer, you can send me an email, which you will see my email address here in just a second. And I can get in touch with them and get your question answered. So first off, we're going to look at the IEC's open space work over the past year. So number one, we have the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as well as the Great American Outdoors Act. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because one of our panelists is actually going to be talking about the successes of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. But broadly, there's been a lot of success with these two intertwined issues. The Great American Outdoors Act just went up for a vote, I believe, last week, and made it pass through the House with bipartisan support. So second, we have the Natural Area Stewardship Act. This was an act that the IEC worked on with a number of state land trusts, helping draft the rules and get it passed. It was actually enacted back in 2017. However, the Department of Natural Resources just submitted its administrative rules to implement the act this year. And what the act does is it establishes a program where land trusts in Illinois can participate in the cost share with IDNR to acquire natural spaces. This was a really big win. It's just taken a bit of time for IDNR to administer it, especially since it was passed under the previous governor. Next, we have DNR funding, operations, and capital. So IEC has worked to make sure that the Illinois Department of Natural Resources funding has stayed stable this year when compared to last year, which has been especially important this year due to the state of things with the COVID pandemic going on. Last year, there was a good amount of money dedicated for open space land acquisition and development, and that funding didn't really face cuts due to the work of IEC and other advocacy groups. So fourth, we have recreational liability. This wound up being a very important bill that protected land trusts. It provided liability protections for conservation properties. So if someone gets injured while, say they're like out on a hike, conservation properties are protected from being held liable for that. This was really important because these conservation properties had serious concerns about being sued over these sorts of injuries. And finally, we have the endangered species. We have endangered species and fighting rollbacks to endangered species protection. The Farm Bureau was recently working to try and change the threshold by which they could obtain permits to remove endangered species from properties. We worked to fight against this and were ultimately able to get the bill killed in the House. And on top of that, IEC has been working with IDNR and the state legislature to ensure that federal endangered species rollbacks are not reflected in Illinois law. So whatever's happening at the federal level, protections are still in place here in Illinois. So with that said, let's move on to the general format for public comments that will take place after our panelists have finished their presentation. So to post your public comment, you have several options that you can take advantage of. First of all, you can post in the chat to request to speak. Just say, you can post your name or just say, I would like to give a public comment. And when the comment period starts, we'll go through those individuals, unmute them, and you'll be able to give your 5-minute public comment. If you don't want to verbally give your comment, you can also just post it in the Zoom chat box where it will be recorded, and you don't have to say it out loud. If you're calling into this town hall by phone, you have the option to raise your hand and speak by pressing *9 on your phone. We will be able to see that you've raised your hand, and you'll be added to the list of those who want to give public comment. And finally, if you don't want to give your comment publicly, you can always send me an email at broth@ilenviro.org. And I will make sure that your comments get recorded. And I will give that email out again at the end and try to post it in the chat once or twice. And finally, I just ask that when you do public comments, that you try to keep it to no more than 5 minutes. If you go a little bit over, that's okay. We just want to keep it around that time frame so that we can hear from as many people as possible and provide an equal opportunity for all participants. So, but before we get to the public comments, we're going to have our panelists give some brief presentations. So speaking first will be Daniel Hebriard, followed by Jerry Adelman, then Susan Donovan, Annie Brawley, Olivia Dorothy, and Bob Fisher and Donnie Dan. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and stop talking, and I'm going to hand it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Ben. I am Daniel Hebriard, President of the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. I have a degree in Parks and Recreation Management from the University of Illinois and a Master's of Business Administration from Benedictine University. I've been with the Forest Preserve in DuPage actually since 2005. I was started as a ranger and got promoted after 2 years to senior ranger and was doing that job until I decided to run against the head of the agency because I thought I could change some things and do a better job. And I won that election in 2018, so I resigned as a ranger and got sworn in the next day as president. So really enjoyed the agency, really enjoyed working up through the ranks to the president. It is a countywide elected position. We've got a lot of unique challenges with open spaces right now. One of the things that is going on is immense usage. So we're seeing in Cook, DuPage, all throughout the Collier counties, and I'm hopeful throughout the state, immense increased usage. So we have over 4 million visits a year through our DuPage County Forest Preserves. And we think that's going to be potentially 6 or all the way up to 8 million this year. With weekends being our busiest time usually, our staff is telling us that every day is like a weekend this year once the COVID hit. So that's one of the things that we're going to really need to address is all this usage obviously is putting a lot of immense pressure on our staff, on our budgets, on these areas and the quality of them. We're lucky and able to handle that because we own 12% of the whole county. So that 1/8 of the county is forest preserve, makes it a lot of space for people to spread out, to go over on the 166 miles of trail that we have, including 50 more miles of county trails, so really over 200 miles of public trail, a lot of it interconnected. We spent 100 years of our history acquiring property in DuPage, and that's why we're lucky to have that much available to our residents. When you look at Cook, obviously they are built out as well. They have over 70,000 acres. You look at Lake, they might be close to built out. And I think what we're seeing is open spaces need to be really built out now into the other Collier counties and throughout the state. Now is going to be a great time to buy property. Obviously, Will County just did a did a bonding. So I think they got 15 or 25 million before COVID hit, which is actually going to work out perfect for them buying properties to be able to expand opportunities to their residents. They have close to the open space that we have, but they are about triple the size of us. So that open space is really going to be so important over the next 20, 40, 60 years. And so I'm really excited for them to be able to do that. And we're going to need to help push that narrative with all of the with all the forest preserves and conservation agencies. Because again, Cook and DuPage built out, Lake's pretty close, but these other ones, obviously McHenry, Kane, Kendall, we want to see growth, and we're going to need help with that from all these sorts of different groups that can help with all the land purchases and acquisitions and grants. So that's one big issue we're seeing is that we're going to see, again, agencies like us tapped out. We just don't have any open space. I was so proud. We just worked on acquiring 200 acres with the municipality. They decided to take full ownership, but it's going to remain open space. So I'm so excited for them. I don't think we have another 200 acres in DuPage. I don't think we have another 100 acres in DuPage that's available. So those are the realities in this urban setting as you get closer into Chicago in the area where I operate. And I think one of the other challenges is just education. So I gave you my background that I worked up through the agency, that I have the conservation background. When we're talking about a lot of our elected officials, they're not going to have that background. A lot of my counterparts are actually also on the county board. And so their main focus may be healthcare and food security and doing those things that any county board needs to do for their residents. And they're also on a forest preserve board. And so when you have a board that's made up like that, you may not have conservation experts, you may not have people aware fully of the issues. So the educational component for our elected officials moving forward is really important to make sure that we're getting our county and municipal, local people aware of what is important, what is going on. And we are actually a separate taxing body in DuPage. So we do have a separate board, and we have people who are fully engaged in the forest preserve, but not in the county board. And I think that does make a difference. And again, I think that's a key component of the open space where we really need to look at and make sure that we know the narrative is out there, that we need to buy land when it's cheap and when it's available right now. So those are a couple of the key points I really wanted to hit. One last one, and it's really something close to my heart. My house is 100% solar powered, and I drive an electric car. I brought that to the Forest Reserve. We did 139 panels at our golf course, and we now have fully 100% solar powered golf carts. We're adding it at Willowbrook Wildlife Center, where we had a generous donation. We're going to have that, I think, about 40% solar powered on our animal care facility. So it's important to educate about other opportunities that once you get into leadership are available to people who are in charge of open spaces. Open spaces are great, but we do have some buildings and we have some areas where we do welcome the public in, of course. And those are opportunities. I look at them as opportunities to be as efficient and effective green leadership. And so hopefully going forward, we've got a couple years left with really nice federal incentives. If you work with private companies, they can take advantage of that. So it doesn't have to be the full burden on government. It can absolutely be a nice partnership for these agencies. So those are some of the stressors and some of the issues facing our forest preserves and our conservation agencies. Certainly we want to make sure we have educated leadership. We want to make sure that we acknowledge it's a great time to look to expand these areas as they're under immense pressure with the visitation and opportunities that are somewhat timely. Thank you for having me here today, Ben.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking. That was really great. And thank you for taking time out of your day to come in. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jerry Adelman from Openlands to give his presentation.
Well, good afternoon. Great to be with all of you. Is the sound okay? Can you hear me all right? Good, good. So Openlands is a 57-year-old regional land conservation group. We work in northeastern Illinois and parts of Indiana and Wisconsin, basically the footprint of Chicago Wilderness region, if you're familiar with it. And, we work with partners to save land at various scales, from a quarter-acre community park in a park-poor Chicago neighborhood to working on 20,000 acres at the Medellin National Tallgrass Prairie at all those different scales. And we use policy, advocacy, and legal tools to protect the land that is protected. Often threats emerge, as we know, so we've got to be very vigilant. And we measure our success really both by the number of acres saved, but also by the number of people engaged. Daniel pointed out about COVID, and during this period, I think we've seen a public expression of how important parks and natural areas, trails, green spaces are to all of us at all these different scales. And with climate, challenges facing us too, thinking about larger landscapes and piecing together our fragmented landscape here in Illinois becomes that much more important. We know that 37% of the solution to climate challenges can be met through conservation and restoration of our lands. But we do have a complicated landscape, and land use decisions are made largely at the municipal level. So leadership with IDNR, the Department of Natural Resources, is critical. And as we've seen, IEC with all of the partners were successful in securing their budget. There are always threats. We need to really continue to build their capacity and leadership. They had really tough years, as we all know, great leadership right now. And they need to look at some alternative funding sources to generate more revenue, such as the wetlands fee and lieu bill, which would both restore more wetlands and give more capacity to them. But I think what's key throughout here is relationships with our elected officials at all levels, local, county, state, and national. And not going to them just when there's a challenge or when there's a need, but to develop those relationships in advance. And Daniel, you pointed out about some elected officials don't necessarily know a lot about how important critical open space is to us for economic vitality, for environmental resilience, for our well-being, for our competitiveness, as a state and region. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is to develop those relationships without an ask and get them out to see sites and educate them about these important issues. We know that funding is key here, obviously, and Ben mentioned already the Natural Areas Stewardship Act that was passed in 2017. We hope it'll become operational soon. It's going to provide new funding, for conservation groups to work in partnership to expand stewardship and restoration at our critical natural areas. And we're blessed in Illinois, 600 dedicated nature preserves with some of the greatest biodiversity that you're going to find in the Midwest, if not the country. 20% of our priority species are found within those nature preserves. So we've got to use every tool we can, and we've got to protect the funding that we do have. So two key things I just want to mention briefly is the Natural Areas Acquisition Fund, and NAF, as it's called, and OSLAD, the Open Space Land and Development Fund. These often have been sacrificed in times of economic needs. The funds are swept. We've got to make sure, we have to be vigilant and make sure that that doesn't happen again. Those funds are more critical today than ever. And IEC plays such a critical role here in alerting us and coordinating our response to these things. A good example too, where we need IEC's help, this is up in northeastern Illinois. There's a bill joint resolution on Route 53 to create a task force to look at this former tollway corridor that goes through some of the most sensitive lands in the state and would negatively impact areas like Bolo Bog going right through the middle of it, Liberty Prairie Reserve, Glacial Park, and Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. So these are the kinds of things that we need coordinated support for statewide, because these are regional landscapes of statewide significance. And, finally, I just want to say things come up that you can't anticipate. Peatone has reared its ugly head again. A third airport that makes no transportation sense, would destroy prime farmland, would negatively impact some critical natural areas, most especially Medewa National Tallgrass Prairie, the first in the country. And so as these things emerge, we need to be prepared. We need to have those relationships with our elected officials, and we need to work closely with IEC on a coordinated effort. What's terribly important in our state is farmland and our waterways, and my colleagues are going to address those, so I won't, but there are key elements obviously here. So I just want to thank all of you for your time. I'm trying to keep to my 5 minutes here. Happy to answer any questions. There's so much to cover, but the bottom line is IEC, we're lucky to have them. We need to work closely with IEC, and we need to be vigilant and on top of things and not be surprised. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Jerry, for that. That was a great presentation. So next we're going to have Susan Donovan of the Nature Conservancy give a brief presentation. So Susan, if you want to unmute yourself, and if you have a PowerPoint, you can share your screen. It looks like Susan might not be in here at the moment. So for the moment, we'll just go ahead. We'll give over her for right now. If she comes in, we'll come back to her. But if it's okay, we'll move ahead to Emmy Brawley from the Conservation Fund. Emmy, do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to share mine with your presentation?
I can, I think I can share it here. Can you see it?
Yeah, looks great.
Great. Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many faces. I'm Emmy Brawley with the Conservation Fund. For those of you who I haven't met yet, the fund is a national conservation organization with a dual mission: land and water conservation and sustainable economic development. So we are headquartered in the DC area, and I opened up the Illinois office in 2017. So I'm going to share a little bit about some work we're doing to bring significant new conservation funding into the state of Illinois. But first, a little bit of context. I know many of you know this, but we have some wonderful science-based plans in Illinois that serve as roadmaps for land and water health, but we have significant funding deficits. So the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy estimates $800 million per year needed to achieve meaningful nutrient loss reduction. And our Wildlife Action Plan says at least 1.3 million acres of new habitat needed to address declining wildlife species. So how do we even begin to think about working at this kind of a scale? And one solution is the incredible amount of funding that's available through the Farm Bill Conservation Title. So the 2018 Farm Bill has up to $60 billion in funding for conservation, including mandatory annual funding for permanent land protection through two programs, the ASEP program and the RCPP program. So we thought somebody ought to go get some of that for Illinois, and that's what we did. So last December, we submitted a proposal, the Conservation Fund as lead partner with 12 supporting partners, a proposal to USDA under the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. We were selected for funding in April and fully funded at the $8.1 million request. We'll be deploying that over 5 years, and we hope to touch 20,000 acres, both through permanent land protection with conservation easements, as well as land management and land restoration. So the resource concern we'll be focusing on is inadequate habitat across the state. There's great synergy with the nutrient loss reduction strategy because water quality prime barrier to better habitat. And we have kind of a multi-pronged strategy for the RCPP funding. We'll be working to protect lands around existing natural areas to create a buffer against incompatible adjacent uses. And then we'll be connecting habitat and existing natural areas, both with permanent land protection as well as land management and restoration, using streams and rivers as corridors. And then we're also lifting up small and mid-sized farmers and diversified perennial and organic operations, and really helping to build momentum for cover cropping in the state. I guess build on the momentum for cover cropping in the state. And then the last piece is really to emphasize equity. So recognizing that the USDA has a really bad history of racial and gender discrimination. We'll be prioritizing projects for ranking, for funding, and doing direct outreach to Black and brown farmers and women farmers. And then also really to emphasize the climate benefits, we'll be focusing on food growers. So our current food system is highly centralized. It's really susceptible to disruption, whether that's COVID or climate change. And so thinking about supporting the growers who are growing food and providing that through alternate supply chains, direct to consumer, et cetera, really helps to build out our food system resiliency. So I want to recognize the project partners who all signed on for this 5-year journey and have pledged their time and resources to help bring these federal dollars into the state. And also to thank the funding partners who were willing to invest in this work at the front end to also get the federal dollars into the state. And just to leave you with some thoughts about policy and going forward. I mean, these are dollars that are available every year, year after year. And Illinois is really leaving them on the table by not having dedicated match funding at either the state or even county level. And that's a barrier to us using those federal dollars consistently at scale. So there's really multiple benefits to these types of projects, from habitat to water quality to food security, carbon sequestration. So I do hope there's a broad coalition that can emerge to start the discussions around dedicated public funding for match for these federal dollars. And as our RCPP projects start to come online, I'm really excited to be able to have illustrated case studies that show the power of this work, the importance of this work, and can really be used as proof points for a policy or advocacy action. So I will leave it there. I'm sure I'm under 5 minutes, but we'll pass it on to the next person. Thank you so much for your time, and look forward to the conversation to come.
Great, thank you so much, Emmy. And if you just want to stop sharing your screen. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really insightful. So now we're going to have Olivia Doherty from American Rivers give a brief presentation. And Olivia, let me pull up the PowerPoint for you. One second. And yeah, just let me know when you would like me to change slides.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ben. So my name is Olivia Doherty, and I'm the director of the Upper Mississippi River Priority Basin Program for American Rivers. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about an often underutilized tool in the conservation community, which is floodplain restoration. Next slide. So American Rivers, we are a relatively new member of the Illinois Environmental Council. So you might not be familiar with our work, but we are a national organization that focuses on protecting wild rivers, restoring damaged rivers, and conserving clean water for people and nature. Next slide. So we have 11 priority river basins, which includes the Upper Mississippi River Basin. And this is my program. And you can see that it includes most of the state of Illinois, which is why we decided to join IEC. Next slide. So a big part of our program in the Upper Mississippi River Basin is focused on floodplain restoration. And there are a number of issues that have been associated with the disconnection of floodplains from rivers. We don't have a really good sense of how many floodplains, how many acres of floodplains are disconnected from rivers because it's something that's not tracked very well throughout the entire US. But we do know that in Illinois, we've got 41% of riparian areas are in a disturbed use, which would indicate that some portion of their floodplain has probably been disconnected from the river. Next slide. And so this creates a number of problems. So most of the time when their river's floodplain is disconnected, it's due to the construction of a levee. And there are really only two types of levees, those that have failed and those that will fail. And so this has a number of both social and environmental impacts. Next slide. So there is a very significant social justice issue with floodplain disconnection and levee construction. We see throughout the upper Midwest that in urban centers especially, the floodplain community is often communities of color and low income. And so this creates a big problem for those of us who are maybe trying to do floodplain restoration or reconnection, because there's a really significant social and environmental justice element to this work. Next slide. But there's also, and really what I wanted to focus on today, a pretty significant impact on river ecosystems due to the significant loss of floodplains. Next slide. And those impacts, related to public safety, floodplains provide space for rivers to flood in. And so when you disconnect the river from its floodplain, that can lead to higher flood stage elevations that could potentially threaten riverside communities and communities that are in the floodplain. And like I just mentioned, oftentimes those are low-income communities and communities of color. Next slide. But there are also a lot of environmental impacts as well. So floodplains, this is a study American Rivers did. Floodplains are actually really good at improving water quality. We've looked at this is from Iowa, not Illinois, but just because Iowa provided their data in a way that we could integrate the literature about floodplain connectivity and its impacts on nutrient reduction. And we actually can see from the literature that's available that floodplains are actually better than wetlands by themselves at reducing nitrogen pollution, and they are also effective at capturing phosphorus as well. Next slide. Floodplain loss in the state of Illinois. There are at least 4 federally threatened and endangered species in Illinois that are threatened in part due to floodplain loss. Next slide. And there's also a significant impact on native fish. There was a really interesting study that was actually done in Missouri during the 2018 flood where they, not the 2018 flood, the 2011 flood, I don't have my notes in front of me, where they blew the floodplain in Missouri, the New Madrid, St. John's Bayou flood levee and flooded that floodplain. Some scientists were able to get in there and take measurements of the fish, and they were able to find that actually the native fish, like the catfish, as well as freshwater drums, they were actually able to grow a lot faster and got a lot fatter in the floodplain. And notably, they did not see the same impact on the invasive carp species that were in the floodplain. So there could be some really important implications to invasive species control by improving access for the native fish into floodplains. Next slide. Floodplains also provide critical recharge areas for a lot of our drinking water supplies, including aquifers. Next slide. And we do know that there are 3 key things to doing floodplain restoration, and that is physically reconnecting the floodplain at scale, meaning, you know, if you have a big river, you need to connect a big portion of the floodplain. A big important part of floodplain restoration is actually restoring the seasonal flood cycle, as well as restoring native vegetation and natural topography. Next slide. So even though those 3 steps seem to be pretty easy to do, it's almost politically impossible to complete floodplain restoration projects. What we found working throughout the United States and in Illinois, that the flood management community and the environmental communities are often siloed. So we've got people who are working in floodplains and not really communicating with each other. There are a lot of perverse incentives to promote floodplain development. Of course, if you build a levee, oftentimes you see a lot of development behind that levee, which increases folks' risk to catastrophic losses should that levee actually breach. And then there's also a lot of significant social justice issues. You know, as the programs right now exist, when you're doing things like home buyouts to make space to do floodplain restoration, a lot of those people are communities of color or low income, and oftentimes there's not other affordable housing for those people to relocate to. Or if there is other affordable housing, it's usually just in another place in the floodplain. So you're not really reducing risk for a lot of families. And that's something that we've seen through a lot of the FEMA programs. Next slide. So in conclusion, just floodplain restoration, it offers a lot, it's a really important tool you can use to tackle habitat loss, as well as improving water quality and reducing flood risk, but it's not being used effectively because of a lot of political barriers. One thing I forgot to mention in the slides was, you know, a lot of times we see floodplain restoration programs that will restore parts of the floodplain, but then keep the levee in place because of the threat of flooding to damage the restoration project that's in the floodplain. And then on the flip side of that, when we do home buyouts and relocations, a lot of that land just gets converted to open space, which from an ecological perspective is not really a functioning floodplain, providing the full suite of services that we need, like habitat and water quality and flood, habitat and water quality, while they do still provide flood risk reduction. And so American Rivers is really looking in Illinois to work on breaking down those silos between the natural resource sector and the floodplain management community to achieve some successes that where we see these barriers popping up. And that's all I have. Sorry, I went over a little bit.
No, thank you so much for that. With that, I'm going to have Bob Fisher and Donnie Dan present. Let me pull up your guys' slide. And
I'm here. Bob?
I'm here. I'm ready to talk.
Can you share start your video?
The presentation is on the screen. My name is Bob Fisher, and I'm the communications chair for the Bird Conservation Network. BCN, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a coalition of about 20 or so groups focused on conserving birds. And many of the members of IEC are also members of the BCN coalition. If you've been following the newspapers, certainly in the past year, you've probably seen this what's on the screen before you, given fairly wide publicity. The bird population in North America has declined by almost 3 million birds. That's an estimated 20% of the total bird population of the continent. And it's dramatic, and it seems to be continuing. Next slide. It's fair to say that the general reason for the decline is probably 90% or more human or anthropogenic causes. But specifically, there's a large number of birds, estimates range from 500 million to possibly over 1 billion birds that are killed annually due to us. And that's a large proportion of the breeding population of those species that breed here in North America. And that's probably one of the reasons why the broader general decline is occurring. The next slide, please. So why do we care? Well, obviously, there are lots of benefits to humanity and to the planet in general of the presence of birds. And here is a fairly comprehensive list. It's not complete, but it's fairly comprehensive of what they do for the planet and for those of us who inhabit the planet. One thing that we've all heard, the canary in the coal mine analogy, and that is an absolutely accurate analogy in the sense that birds are very, very good indicators of environmental degradation and of the health of our ecosystems. We only need to look back to Rachel Carson and her famous book about DDT and the impact, which was really first observed among raptors, falcons, and other large raptors, which suffered a huge population decline because of the impact of eggshell thinning on their breeding success. And it's taken more than 50 years to get that problem, you might say, out of the environment. It's not completely out, but happily, we can say that many raptors have recovered from their low points when DDT was widely used. Nobody seems to think very highly of vultures, for example, or for that matter, eagles. By the way, eagles, our national symbol, does eat roadkill, as do turkey vultures. But in any case, carcass cleanup and prevention of disease from those carcasses is an important use, as is for smaller birds, swallows, swifts, and so forth. Insect eating, very, very important. Seed dispersal, pollination, and perhaps certainly important to those of us who are birders, improved mental health. I think we all talk about getting outside and being outdoors, and certainly hearing the birds sing is maybe better than hearing a 400 horsepower car racing by. I think it's better for our mental health, if you will. So we have a good reason to care on a lot of different levels of what can we do to control, reverse this decline in the bird population, not just here in North America, but all around the world. Next slide, Ben. One of the things that we do have some degree of control over is collisions with human structures. Buildings, communication towers, vehicles, power lines, wind turbines are all sources of bird mortality. This is a photo taken, I believe, in Colorado of I believe this was mostly window strikes. I don't remember the number of species contained here, but it's very, very large. And the impact of building kills is enormous in the country. Next slide. So why do birds fly, particularly, why do they fly into glass? Fundamentally, they don't see it. I don't know if you've done it, but it happened to me one time. I was somewhere on business and I walked right into a glass exit door in a hotel because it was so clean I couldn't see it, or I was paying no attention, probably a better reason. But birds literally can't see unless there's something there for them to focus on. That image at the bottom of this slide is a bird that clearly flew directly into a window. And that's the, you might say, the feather dust that he left when he or she impacted that window, and almost certainly was killed by the impact. There's a group here in Chicago, the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, that annually during migration walks the streets of the downtown, and it's their sad task to pick up dead birds, dying birds. Occasionally they're able to rescue birds, but mortality even among the rescued birds is pretty high. So it is a serious and major problem, and it is one that we can do something about. Next slide. There are a number of solutions that that work. And gradually, I think, as a state, as a city, as a state, perhaps as a country, we're becoming aware that we can implement those solutions. The flip side of that, of course, is that virtually every minute of the day, more glass is going in somewhere. But the good news is that there are design elements, various techniques that can be used to make the birds aware of that glass so that they don't impact it, they avoid it. And there are many, many now award-winning designs that incorporate bird-friendly glass. If we as IEC and as educators of both the political leaders and the public, if we take a strong position that this is a problem that is correctable on a lot of different levels, we can reduce this problem. I don't know that we'll ever be able to eliminate it totally, but we can certainly reduce the numbers substantially. The American Institute of Architects has taken some steps. There's legislation that's been passed in various locations around the country. I'll address that in the next slide. But even the public education side, that homeowners who have a lot of glass, if we can get the message out there that they can prevent or at least substantially reduce bird kills, but sometimes it's as simple as installing screens on the outside.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry, I think we've got to cut you off there. We got to keep running through the schedule to get the public comment and stuff like that. But we will be sharing these slides and stuff with folks afterwards.
Elliot, can I add something? This is Donnie.
Donnie.
A quick comment, kind of a pickup on what Bob said and what Jerry Edelman said. Birds are important just because they're here. I don't think because they just take care of pollination and do insect control, that's the reason that we must value them. I mean, the measure of birds' importance is no greater than the measure of the Amazon forest is because of what it does for the pharmacy shelf. So that's got to be kept in mind. The second point I want to make briefly is get to know your legislators, from city council to your representatives in the state. Get to know them and influence them. That's the best way on a personal level. And just can't be emphasized enough. Everybody should get to know their personal legislator. Ask for an appointment, talk about these issues to them. Thank you.
Ben, run through the last three. I won't comment.
What was that?
I said just run through the last two. Just show them briefly and I won't comment.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Okay, just the last slide, or?
That's fine.
Oh, okay. Thank you guys both for that presentation. And I just want to check if Susan is on. Are you on, Susan? Okay, so I don't think Susan's on. If Andrew Schrock, if you'd be willing to talk about the LWCF, that would be great.
Thank you, Ben. And I understand time is very short, so I'll make this as quick as possible. Very, very big news the past week or two out of Washington, and that's that the Great American Outdoors Act has passed Congress and will actually be signed by the president. Really, really tremendous news, and it does two primary things for us in conservation that folks should know about. It fully and permanently funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund to the tune of $900 million a year that goes to projects that acquire land, repair conservation properties and public lands, and supports federal natural areas. Most notably in Illinois, LWCF funds have gone to Medewa National Tallgrass Prairie. This is a big deal because over the years, more than half of the money that was supposed to go to the Land and Water Conservation Fund has been diverted to other purposes. And just to give you a scale about how much that is, Illinois projects have received about $213 million over the years. So imagine that doubling now going forward. I think that's really got potential to elevate what we do here in Illinois around land and water conservation. Second thing that Great American Outdoors Act does is set aside about $1.9 billion a year for each of the next 5 years to address deferred maintenance on federal lands. Just in the Chicago region alone, I know we've got $45 million at Indiana Dunes National Park, $25 million in deferred maintenance at Pullman National Historic Monument. And so that's a big increase in the amount of money that can go to address these things. This is the culmination of many, many years of work by a lot of us. I know Jerry and I have been in Washington each of the last at least 6 years, well, except for this year, lobbying for this, and as have many of you on the call. So it's a big congratulations. IEC has played a very big role in the past couple years on this. Thanks to the staff for convening meetings virtually when necessary with congressional staffers. And we've gotten this to the point where all but 3 of Illinois' members of Congress voted in favor of the Great American Outdoors Act. So it's a great testament to the work everyone did. But now, what's next? We want to keep this momentum going. There's proposals floated by many of us and Senator Durbin to greatly expand what was the Civilian Conservation Corps to create many more jobs in the realm of conservation. So while we've come a long way and achieved some great things, there's much more work to be done. And we'd greatly appreciate any support from IEC and other members on this call to get some of those next steps done. So thank you, guys.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. So yeah, thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists who spoke today and for these great presentations. And now we're going to move into the public comment section. So again, you can post in the chat if you would like to speak. We'll unmute you, or if you just want to post your comment in the chat, that's fine too. Again, please try to keep these comments to no more than 5 minutes. If you feel that you need more than 5 minutes, or if you have multiple comments, please send them to my email, which again, it's in the chat, but it is broth@ilenviro.org, and I will get them recorded. So yeah, go ahead and put your public comments in, and I'll give that a minute.
I think the first question was for me from Nicole. What's the difference between a floodplain and a wetland is what she's asking. So a floodplain is the area of land next to a river or stream that is prone to flooding from that river. It's just wherever the river or the water wants to go. A wetland is, wetlands can be in floodplains, so it can be a component of that geology. But wetlands don't exist exclusively in floodplains. So you can have upland wetlands as well as floodplain wetlands.
Great, thank you. And so next comment is to Bob and Donnie from Bonnie Garrett. Do darkened / unlit windows deter bird hits?
Yes. In the general sense, they do. Particularly night migrating birds, lights attract them. So it is turning the lights off, particularly in metro areas, is very beneficial in preventing collisions at night.
To say nothing of its value for darker skies and economics, and pay lower electric costs, turn the lights off, save birds, see the sky, and save money.
Great, thank you. Let's see, do we have any other comments? So I'm just gonna read this out. Sheila Voss says, too often at the city/county level, the public is engaged far too late in the development project timeline. Is there a toolkit available for use by citizens or grassroots groups to educate and engage city/county decision makers earlier in the process of land use planning and design in the context of long-term environmental, human, and economic benefits? I don't know if anybody, any of our panelists would like to touch on that.
I know that the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has the Greenest Region Compact. This is obviously now for the 7-county, metropolitan area, not statewide, but I think some of those tools where municipalities would sign on and looking comprehensively at sustainability and environmental issues, that I suspect some of that background material would be relevant almost anywhere in the state.
I would also suggest just building relationships with whoever your local alderman or council member, depending on what your government structure is, and trying to get coffee with them frequently. I know with COVID-19, but maybe do some Zoom coffees with them, and just also attending those city council meetings or the county board meetings. Just to stay on top of things, because a lot of things get discussed at those in the very early stages of the process. And then also just having a good relationship with your local official, whoever that local official is. And if they know that you are interested in development stuff, then they will usually let you know when those projects start to come up.
Great, thank you guys. Renee Patton says, I really like the river priority and regional waterway condition corridors. In these times or uprisings for justice and COVID, losing access to travel to other states and access to the lakefront for swimming, our local waterways and all the benefits they provide are most accessible and important. Yeah, definitely agree. If anybody wants to comment, you can. Yeah, if anybody else has other comments, feel free to post them.
Ben, can I add 2 things in a legislative sense?
Absolutely.
There are 2 pending bills. No, I'm Donnie, I'm not Bob. There are two bills pending, both of crucial importance, one on the federal level, sponsored by Mike Quigley and Congressman Griffiths from Virginia, that will mandate that all future federal buildings be built on a bird-friendly basis. It's garnered a number of co-sponsors, and if you can write your congressman and senators urging passage of the Federal Safe Buildings Act, that would be great. A similar bill is pending in Illinois, sponsored by my congressman, Bob Morgan, and that is House Bill 4476. Oh, the federal bill is 919, Senate Bill 919, I believe. The House bill in Illinois is 4476 that will require state buildings likewise to be built bird friendly. So both of those pieces of legislation should be encouraged.
Great, thank you so much. If we have any other comments, I'll give people a minute to post in the chat. And again, if you don't want to give your comment publicly, you can always send me an email and I will post my email address again. Let's see.
I can touch on Bob's question really quick. Bob Fisher, he said, what can IEC do to encourage natural landscaping? One of the things I'm actually doing right now is working with one of our members that lives in Decatur area that is trying to get an ordinance passed that would allow for people to have kind of like natural landscapes like in their backyards and that kind of thing, just so they don't have to, you know, worry about like the landscaping requirements that are often in city ordinances regarding like grass length and that kind of thing. So we've been working with a lot of folks at the local level to try to get good city codes passed that allow folks to do this in a reasonable and you know, environmentally friendly way. So we've been doing that. At the state level, it's kind of hard because whenever you try to pass a bill that tells all the cities and municipalities what they have to do, they usually get upset. We encountered that with our Right to Garden bill that I've been working on this last year. But we're actively working with some like local folks and counties and that kind of thing to try to address that. So hope that answers your question a little bit, Bob. We're doing lots of stuff, but if you have any follow-up questions, let me know.
Great. Yeah, if anybody has any final questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Just give another minute or so. Okay. Bonnie Garris asks, once floodplains are developed, what options do people really have who live there?
Yeah, so for the folks that are living in floodplains, there are a number of buyout programs, which is oftentimes that's a state and federal program that whereby basically you are offered if a flood has already happened, you're usually offered the cost of your home before the flood took place, or the value of your home before the flood took place. There are also pre-disaster grant programs and HUD grant programs that can also buy folks out so that they can relocate. However, that sort of what do folks do next is a really big question, and that has been raised within the environmental justice community as something that needs to be addressed at federal and state levels to provide better assistance, especially to communities of low income, where maybe they don't have the resources, you know, they're just getting the value of their home, which may be a very low value, and that value may not translate to a new home in a less flood prone area. And so there are a number of policy things that need to be done to try to assist communities and people with that sort of what comes next part of the equation.
Great, thank you.
Did that answer that question? That was kind of vague, a vague question. So if I didn't get that, let me know.
You did great. Okay, if Jim McGrath asks, or says, what agency in Illinois protects wildlife habitat? I ask because we are fighting a new fire station being built in a heavily wooded residential area that is home to deer and red fox, among others.
I mean, this would be DNR primarily. I mean, in this juncture, I think if they're building in like a wooded area, I don't know if they would need to get prior approval from DNR for like taking permits or that kind of thing, depending on the species. But yeah, if you have any concerns about a specific property, I would definitely reach out to the Department of Natural Resources, to their wildlife team, and try to figure out if they can do anything.
Great. Just wait and see if there are any other comments. I'm going to go ahead and also just post my email address again, if anybody wants to submit a private comment. And give it another 30 seconds. Okay, I think that is all the, oh, somebody want to say something?
Ben, I'm not sure if I can do this, but I'd love to share my screen.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think you should have the ability to share your screen.
It's at the bottom of the...
Yeah, it is. There's a share screen button.
Yeah, Bob's talk is on now, or Bob's last screen is on. Let's see if I can get back to my. I don't want to hold everybody up. I'll learn for next time.
sounds good. Okay, so yeah, with that, if there are no further comments, again, you can send me an email, post it in the chat. It's droth@ilenviro.org. With that, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you to everybody who joined us today, including those who provided public comment. And also a big thank you to all of our presenters who took time out of their day to come and present on these open space topics. I hope this event was insightful for everyone. It's been especially helpful for us here at the IEC as we work to determine our legislative and advocacy work in this coming year. And again, yeah, thank you to everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday and a good week. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks for your organization, Ben.
Thank you.